Welcome to the Parish Church of St. Cuthbert for the first of these Festival Fringe podcasts. I'm delighted that we have with us on his first visit to St. Cuthbert's Donald Macleod from BBC Radio 3, known to many of you, I'm sure, for his excellent series Composer of the Week. Well, firstly, Donald, a very warm welcome to St. Cuthbert's, and I think you've just walked in and you were a bit taken by surprise.
It's an overwhelming space. I mean, it's not what I expected of a Church of Scotland. That amazing little jewel of a memorial chapel is absolutely breathtaking. And I mean, to most traditional members of the Church of Scotland, more than slightly shocking.
And I like what you just said there, because in many ways, I think if you come to a festival, such as we've got in Edinburgh at the moment, you've got to be open to surprises. And in your experience, what do you think something like the Fringe or the festival brings to a place like Edinburgh, which is already well established, I suppose, within the musical world?
The Fringe is an area which, I guess, for the past something like 20 years, I haven't had time to become very familiar with. I've seen some outstanding things, but I'm occupied with presenting events in the main festival, the international festival. And so I can't give a very accurate impression of that, although I have to say that several of my most vivid impressions of anything that's happened in Edinburgh have been Fringe events. There was an extraordinary thing, even though Summerhall is a place that, I hate this term, in fact I won't use it, I was about to use the curate word, but they find and offer platforms to really unusual but consistently incredibly high quality things. And I mean, it sounds faintly ludicrous. There was I can't remember what the show was called, but it was a magical thing in which a man contrived to make the cheapest sort of little supermarket carrier bags dance with each other in a pair. It was absolutely, I mean, I looked round, I found at a certain point that my mouth was hanging open because I simply couldn't believe this. And I looked round and everybody had become a child, really. It was such a simple, wonderful thing. It was transformative, and I'm slightly ashamed to say so. I mean, I think a tear might have crept into my eye because he contrived to make a sort of tragic ending to this thing, which was simply genius. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before or since.
And I picked up on the word you used there, transformative. And within your, I suppose, repertoire, when you come up here, you're given your diet of programs that you must engage with. How do you transform what you're given into something that those hearing it might receive it and discover new things?
I think my job is not to get in the way, really. The festival, from its beginning 75 years ago, has consistently offered music making of world class. Very often from, you know, the great established figures, but also introducing musicians that we have never heard in this country, at least before. And it has an extraordinary record at doing that. One of the few really positive things to come out of what happened to us all in the pandemic, I think, was people's real thirst to engage with music, and particularly classical music, because pop music does a certain amount of stuff, but I mean, the listening figures for Radio 3 went up really markedly as people found they wanted something more profound. And listening to Bach, or I had the extraordinary opportunity in 2020 to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth, and even as I recall it, I slightly choke up because I was on my own. Excuse me.
No, take a minute. Just that you're allowed to choke up in this space. I think this space is a space that allows you to do that. And I've just come down from the pulpit giving a sermon today, and I was telling a story about 2 Ukrainian refugees I had the privilege of looking after a few weeks ago, and they decided to go home because they're just missing their friends and they're going into a place of danger, and I thought I'd provided safety. And I was sat up there crying as soon as I finished the sermon while the anthem was being sung. And can I just develop that a wee bit? Do you think a space like this allows you to be vulnerable? Does music allow you to be vulnerable?
Oh, I think so. It brings all kinds of things to the surface. But I had the special privilege of being able to look at Beethoven in greater depth than I had ever done before, and in greater depth than any radio station has ever done. It was 25 weeks, 125 programs of an hour each, and we turned him round in the light and looked at him from so many different points of view, with expert witness from all kinds of people, musicians and technical people and historians and economists, and it was quite phenomenal. And to be in his company through all of that, and I was recording at home during that, was an incredibly profound experience altogether. And I think that the things that people got out of music were very, very profound and unexpected for a lot of people, I think. I mean, there were people who, I saw tweets of people who had never listened to Radio 3 before, but had decided to take a plunge and were amazed by what they found. But then, when live performances began to be possible again, the sense of people being really moved was absolutely visible. It was almost palpable. I mean, the first few concerts in the magical space that the festival created in the old quad was just amazing. The artists themselves were profoundly moved, and for instance, Nicola Benedetti, when she introduced the first of, she was kind of artist in residence, she broke down because she was just overwhelmed by that sense of connection that music being. I mean, she played the first piece. It was a series of concertos, and then when she had to address the business of what they were engaged in, she was just. You think of an artist of such standing and accomplishment, who I'm sure has to distance herself from what she does, and I hope that will never go away. That sense of valuing music that one has, and the performance of music that I think, you know, many of us who work in the area have slightly taken for granted. And certainly people who just switch on the radio and listen to this amazing stuff coming out were forced to reappraise that, I think.
And just taking you back to, you know, how you so beautifully reflected on being alone, but somehow Beethoven was there with you. Would you say he spoke to you more through his music, or the sense of who he was as a person that you started unpacking?
It was obviously both things.
Right.
I mean, I had the opportunity to listen to not quite everything he wrote, but dealing with the late quartets was a revelatory experience. I'd never listened to them so much, so often, or so intently, and they spoke to me in ways. I think also that's music that speaks to you in different ways the older you get. But also, I was just able to look at. I ended up towards the end, well, from about halfway through, with 2 piles of books, with no exaggeration, that height, you know, a meter off the floor, because we had the opportunity to explore so many different sources, and my team were incredibly resourceful in digging out things that we hadn't really known existed before, all the accounts from his friends and so on. And so we really did get a sense of the complete man with all his faults, and he had so many of them. And yet people loved him, and he created so much absolutely phenomenal music. And things like, you know, there were particular pieces that some people find, I think, difficult to love. The one opera, Fidelio, but there is so much in that piece that there are certain pieces in there, the great duet, which just reduces me to tears every time I hear it.
And when you go into such depth, as you obviously did with Beethoven, and when you know what you can get out of going into such depth, does it now make it difficult to go and do a week of Composer of the Week where you can't go into that depth? Do you feel like you're not letting off the hook would be the wrong word, but do you feel like you're not doing justice to the character?
Absolutely, unquestionably. The few weeks, 6 or so weeks after when we done the final Beethoven week, felt I missed him.
Right. Wow.
I missed his presence and the extraordinary power of that music, and the fact that I couldn't, there simply isn't time in 5 programs to represent there are people that we do every year. It would be lovely to do something comparable with Schubert, I think. And with, I mean, I've been privileged to do an awful lot of Bach. I mean, I've been doing this program for a long time, so there are people I've now done 20 times.
Right.
And we try to look at different facets of them. But inevitably, you can't go into that kind of detail every time.
And when you say you miss him, how would you compensate for that loss? By just going to listen to the music, or would there be another way you would evoke what was obviously for you a huge moment in your, not just professional career, but it sounds like in your personal life as well?
I don't know that I can really.
Right.
There are certain pieces that I got to know that I maybe hadn't valued to the same extent before. That I guess just speak to me more powerfully than they did previously. I'm probably slightly unusual. I think I have a fairly thin skin, and I'm quite easily moved by things. It's not a Scots characteristic, but it's true of me.
I think that's very reassuring in your role, sharing music with people. I think people to know that it moves you, and you're not pretending it doesn't. I think must make it. I certainly know as a minister, when you go training to be a minister, they don't want, a general leading the battalions forward.
No.
They want, a wounded healer up there who can really share something of their own vulnerability, to allow others to feel vulnerable too. And for me, and what you've just shared with us, the last few minutes, is a real sense of you're giving people permission, I think, to be vulnerable, to feel sometimes broken, and also to be reinforced, because there's something there that is ultimately, lifting them up. Now that might be me putting words into your mouth, and I don't want to say that.
I mean, the fact is, I have to deal with an awful lot of composers, and like many great artists, these are often people with monstrous egos. I mean, I would, in the main, and I am generalizing hopelessly broadly, they're a pretty unpleasant bunch, really. But there are people who really stand out, Beethoven and Bach and Haydn. But then there are figures who aren't there necessarily in a pantheon of however limited you want to make it. And someone like Carl Nielsen, who is a man of such extraordinary humanity, and his music seems to me to declare that so wonderfully, gloriously. You feel you know him through the music, through the roundness, the many aspects of things that he deals with. And his life story is a remarkable thing. I mean, this is a man who, at a time when it was extremely unusual, stayed home to mind the children, while his wife, who was a very accomplished sculptor, went off to have a career of her own. An extremely unusual and unselfish thing to do.
Because you just shared the example there, but then just before that you said how many of the composers, whether it's through their ego, can actually be quite unpleasant characters. Is that because of competition? Is it between them and having to outdo each other?
No, I think there's something in the business of having a really exceptional talent that many people have been. People have had to struggle, but people become famous and begin to believe in their own kind of mythology. But even someone that I enormously admire, and a man of great humanity like Mahler, imposed this extraordinary, this prenup in which she simply has to abandon her career completely and be the servant of his genius. And that's the case a lot of the time, because it was a traditional thing that women, when they got married, would take on the housewifely role, and if they married a creative artist, they would always be at the service of his genius. And just makes some of these characters more than slightly tricky. I mean, we had the opening concert of the festival last night with Carl Orff's Carmen and Burana, a piece of music which,
keeps you awake.
Keeps you awake, and about which I have reservations on a number of fronts. But I've only once, thank heavens, had to deal with him. He emerged as one of the most unpleasant people ever. I mean, the extent of his involvement with the Nazis is, I think, is probably questionable. That's an easy thing to do, but simply his conduct towards his family was absolutely shameful. I mean, there's a recorded interview with his daughter saying how painful it was for her growing up, knowing that her father wasn't remotely interested in her at all.
So, in a way, just over the last few minutes, we've, been real highs in your experience of living with Mozart, but then the real lows of what you've just shared there. And I suppose music just reflects humanity as a whole, in the good times and the bad, when it's going well and when it's not. And
the great thing, I mean, talking about what's just begun, the Edinburgh Festival, is one of the absolute highlights for me of every year, because my job is a very solitary one. I sit at home and I churn out this guff week after week after week. And although I have a team of producers, we see each other for maybe 3 hours on Mondays to record the stuff that I previously wrote. Quite a lot of the time they've been producing remotely, so they haven't physically been present. But when I come to Edinburgh, I work genuinely as part of a team. And a really high quality team. I mean, these are people who really know what they're doing, the sound engineers and the producer. And it is, for me, it's a really rewarding thing to feel genuinely that you are part of a team and everybody's showing consideration for other people and respecting the particular talents that they have. It gives me an enormous charge to do that.
And as well as being part of a team there, and obviously your own personalities interact and hold you together, do you think the music that you're being asked to deliver for everyone else binds the team together?
Oh, for certain. I mean, it's kind of archetypal busman's holiday.
Right,
But I just feel incredibly privileged to be able to sit and listen to all this amazing music and be paid for it.
Right.
How good is that, really?
And just to finish with, I noticed you said, for me, I picked up the sense of loneliness. And I think that's a common theme through lockdown, but also working a lot from home, because I think as an avid Radio 3 listener, I'm conscious now that quite a few of your colleagues, Petrock and Georgia Mann, are very good on Twitter, and they see this as a way of engaging people around the themes. Do you think Composer of the Week will go down that route? And obviously I noticed you Twitter, that's how we tweet, that's how we got in touch, but not at the same sort of level.
No, I mean, the chemistry is completely different. It's not live. I mean, I can't have that very valuable kind of direct interaction with listeners where you can actually say, why don't you suggest what we do later in the program? And then they can hear that and they can hear their names mentioned. And so, I mean, that's not possible. My programs are recorded 2 months in advance at the least, and they have to be repeatable. So we can't have things that locate them at particular times, or if we do, we have to.
So I guess in your case, you're more likely to get people's thoughts about what you've said.
Yes.
And I'm sure good and bad, just
no. On the contrary, it's. I was extremely reluctant. I don't do Facebook or any other kind of social media, and my then editor rang me up to suggest that I might like to go on Twitter. She represented it as being a kind of experiment, the first recorded program to have a Twitter feed. And I was really reluctant. I didn't want to do it, but I recognized that this was not so much a request as an instruction. And so I thought, oh, harumph.
So if you want to do another Beethoven or Schubert,
it's just going to turn over stones and all kinds of things will keep out. On the contrary, have I had any negative comments? I can't remember any.
Wonderful,
People are so appreciative and incredibly positive, and they tell, it's a way of people. I think I'm not sure that I use it as intelligently as one could in terms of, I never quite understand the etiquette. I mean, I don't think because somebody follows me, I have to follow them.
No, exactly.
But There was once some really obnoxious comment in a kind of general way about Radio 3, and that's the only one person I've ever blocked. I think the most critical thing someone has ever said is, I need to learn to take better photographs with my iPhone.
Okay. Well, I think on that point, as the festival's all about communication and welcoming people from all around the world and engaging with them, and I know a lot of the shows go out on social media as well, and we've just done a podcast as well. So in our own little way, we've been part of this sort of revelation of communication. But, you know, on behalf of, and you've met some of my congregation there, it's just so appreciative of what you do during the week and sharing with them and giving them, you know, reason to feel good about themselves and also to be able to locate their own feelings within the music that you so brilliantly share. So as I head off to Bayreuth, I will re-tune into your Wagner Composer of the Week, download it onto my my phone. And but no, Donald, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely 20 minutes.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.